I really think that we've just been able to encapsulate the amount of difference in not only in my voice but in the kind of person I've become over these past 2.5 years.
There are moments in television history that become larger than the programs that created them. A few minutes of footage, a single performance, a face the world never expected. And suddenly, millions of people remember exactly where they were when they saw it for the first time. In 2012, a shy 17-year-old walked onto a stage in London wearing an oversized suit jacket, avoiding eye contact with an audience that had already decided who he was. Before he sang a single note, the whispers had already begun. Some smiled politely, others exchanged skeptical glances. A few laughed under their breath. It wasn't because anyone had heard his voice. It was because they thought they already knew his story simply by looking at him. Then something extraordinary happened. He opened his mouth, and within seconds the room became completely silent. The same audience that had judged him before he spoke was now standing in disbelief. Even Simon Cowell, a man whose reputation had been built on interrupting performances and delivering brutally honest criticism, simply listened. For a brief moment, appearances disappeared. Expectations vanished. All that remained was a voice that sounded far older than the teenager standing on that stage. Millions of people remember that audition. Far fewer know what came before it. Even fewer understand what happened after the applause faded. Because this is not really a story about a viral audition. It is a story about what years of rejection can do to a young person, and what quiet perseverance can build when the cameras finally move on. To understand why that performance mattered so deeply, we have to travel back long before the bright lights of Britain's Got Talent. Long before the standing ovation. Long before the internet turned Jonathan Antoine into one of the most recognizable voices to emerge from a television talent show. The real story begins in Essex, England. Jonathan Antoine was born in 1995 into an ordinary family living far away from recording studios, opera houses, and celebrity culture. Nothing about his childhood suggested that millions of people would one day know his name. There were no famous relatives, no powerful industry connections, no carefully planned career waiting for him. There was simply a quiet boy who discovered something that made him feel understood. For many children, music is background noise. A song playing on the radio during a car ride, a melody heard at school, something entertaining before moving on to the next interest. For Jonathan, music became something much more personal. As a young boy, he encountered recordings of legendary Italian tenor Luciano Pavarotti. He couldn't fully explain why those performances affected him so deeply. He only knew that when he listened, the world seemed to become quieter. The anxiety disappeared for a little while. The uncertainty gave way to something steady and beautiful. Opera wasn't fashionable among children his age. Most of his classmates had never listened to it. Some probably didn't even know what it was. But Jonathan didn't care. He listened. He practiced. He learned. Again and again. What began as admiration slowly became discipline. Without realizing it, he was training an extraordinary instrument that would one day astonish millions. Yet outside his bedroom, life looked very different. School was difficult. Children can be remarkably kind. They can also be remarkably cruel. Jonathan later spoke openly about being bullied throughout much of his childhood. His weight became an easy target. His love of classical music made him seem different. His naturally gentle personality often left him feeling isolated rather than accepted. Day after day, he experienced something many people remember long after they leave school. The feeling of becoming invisible. Or worse, the feeling of being noticed only for the things others wanted to mock. For someone carrying that kind of emotional weight, confidence doesn't disappear all at once. It fades quietly. One comment, then another laugh, another difficult day. Eventually, you begin believing the voices around you more than your own. Jonathan found one place where those voices couldn't reach him. Music. Every rehearsal became a refuge. Every note offered a kind of conversation that required no explanation. When life felt overwhelming, singing never judged him. It simply asked him to breathe. Teachers occasionally recognized the remarkable quality of his voice, but talent alone rarely changes someone's life. Encouragement has to arrive at the right moment, and even then, it only matters if the person receiving it can believe it. Jonathan wasn't sure he could. For years, he practiced mostly in private. Not because he lacked ability, because he lacked certainty. It's easy to watch a famous performance years later and imagine success was inevitable. It never is. Behind almost every unforgettable public moment are countless invisible hours that nobody applauds. Hours of practice, hours of doubt, hours spent wondering whether anyone would ever truly understand what you were trying to become. Those invisible years shaped Jonathan far more than the audition ever could. And then someone entered his life who saw something he couldn't yet see himself. Her name was Charlotte Giaconelli. The two met while studying music, and almost immediately Charlotte recognized what others had overlooked. She heard more than a gifted teenage singer. She heard a voice capable of stopping people in their tracks. Perhaps more importantly, she believed in Jonathan during a period when he still struggled to believe in himself. Sometimes the turning point in a person's life isn't an opportunity. It's another human being refusing to give up on them. When auditions opened for Britain's Got Talent in 2012, Charlotte suggested they enter together as a duet. Jonathan's first reaction wasn't excitement. It was fear. The idea of standing before thousands of people inside a theater, and eventually millions watching on television, felt almost impossible. He remembered every cruel joke, every insult, every moment of embarrassment. Television would multiply all of that. What if they laughed again? What if the judges dismissed him before he finished his first line? What if the audience confirmed every insecurity he had carried since childhood? Those weren't imaginary fears. They were built from years of lived experience. Charlotte kept encouraging him. She reminded him that opportunities like this rarely come twice. Eventually, after weeks of uncertainty, Jonathan agreed. It would become one of the most important decisions of his life. Neither teenager could possibly know that within weeks, a performance lasting only a few minutes would travel across the world, inspiring millions of strangers who had never heard their names before. But before that remarkable moment arrived, there was one final walk. A walk from backstage toward the bright lights. A walk carrying years of bullying, quiet practice, hidden dreams, and unanswered questions. A walk that would change everything. Stay with us, because the next chapter isn't simply about one of the greatest auditions in Britain's Got Talent history. It's about the extraordinary moment when an entire room realized how completely they had misjudged the teenager standing before them. The morning of the audition did not feel like the beginning of a dream. It felt like the possibility of public failure. Backstage, contestants rehearsed lines, adjusted outfits, and tried to convince themselves that the next few minutes might change their lives. Some projected confidence. Others hid their nerves behind forced smiles. Jonathan Antoine belonged firmly in the second group. He wasn't worried about forgetting the music. He was worried about the people. For years, crowds had rarely been kind to him. Experience had taught him that strangers often formed opinions before they knew anything about his character. Standing behind the curtain, waiting to step into one of the most watched talent competitions in Britain, those memories returned with remarkable clarity. Charlotte Giaconelli noticed it immediately. She had seen Jonathan's confidence disappear before performances, but she also knew something the audience didn't. She had heard him sing countless times without cameras, without judges, and without the pressure of national television. She believed the same thing she had believed from the beginning. Once he started singing, everything else would disappear. When their names were called, the pair walked onto the stage together. The judges smiled politely. The audience watched curiously. At first glance, they looked like two ordinary teenagers chasing an impossible dream. Nothing about the moment suggested that millions of people would still be talking about it more than a decade later. Simon Cowell asked the usual questions. Their names, their ages, why they had entered the competition. Jonathan answered quietly, almost apologetically. His nervousness was impossible to hide. Every word seemed carefully measured, as though he hoped not to attract too much attention before the performance even began. Then came the brief pause that exists before every life-changing moment. The music started. They had chosen the prayer, a piece celebrated not only for its beauty but also for the extraordinary vocal control it demands. It is the kind of song that quickly reveals whether a singer possesses genuine technique or simply confidence. Jonathan took a breath, and everything changed. His opening notes filled the theater with a richness that seemed impossible to reconcile with the shy teenager standing under the spotlight. The transformation was immediate. Conversations stopped. Expressions shifted. The uncertainty that had lingered across the audience dissolved almost instantly. People who had expected an ordinary audition suddenly found themselves witnessing something unforgettable. The judges leaned forward. Simon Cowell, known for interrupting performances that failed to impress him, remained completely silent. Amanda Holden smiled in astonishment. The audience that had entered the performance with quiet skepticism slowly rose to its feet before the final note had even faded. It wasn't simply technical excellence that moved people. It was the contrast. Moments earlier, Jonathan had appeared frightened of the room. Now the room seemed completely captivated by him. Sometimes extraordinary talent does more than entertain. It forces people to confront their own assumptions. Millions of viewers watching from home experienced exactly the same realization. They hadn't expected that voice. They hadn't expected that confidence could emerge from someone who had looked so uncertain only moments earlier. The performance spread rapidly across television broadcasts, news programs, and eventually the internet. Long before short-form video became the center of online culture, clips of Jonathan and Charlotte's audition were being shared around the world. Families watched together. Music teachers replayed the performance for their students. Professional singers praised the remarkable maturity of Jonathan's voice.